Violet here, second generation homeschooling mom of 3. I have an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, and an infant. Today I wanted to share with you 2 helpful books for planning your school year. So let's get into it. So I'm hoping over the summer to share several videos about my planning process for the upcoming school year. I don't know how many videos yet, but this is part 1. So I'm going to show you a flip through of these books, and then I'll talk about kind of my planning process and what I pull from each of them. So I'm going to start with this one, How to Homeschool the Kids You Have. And I think especially if you're new to homeschooling, this is the book that I would recommend first. This book I find really helpful. Both of these books are from a classical perspective. This is kind of the neoclassical Bible, if you will. And then Courtney, Jen, and Andrew are all coming from a classical background. So I'm not a strictly classical homeschooler. I'm eclectic, but I do value academic rigor. And so I do end up gravitating towards a lot of classical stuff. And I also was homeschooled. Classically, my mom had one of the older editions of the Well-Trained Mind, and that's what she pulled from a lot to homeschool me and my siblings. So this book breaks down, let me just show you the table of contents, and then we'll go through the chapters. It breaks down all the things you need to think about when you're planning. So it starts with an introduction of the authors, which is really important. You know what their background is and where they're coming from. It talks about the different kinds of people who might homeschool. And then it gets right into who the book is for and who it's not for. And then it talks about how you're going to decide what you're going to do in your homeschool and what curriculum you're going to choose and all of that. So chapter 1 is defining your educational goals, and it talks a lot about what are you trying to achieve in your homeschool? Like, what is your vision? What are you working towards? And I do think that's a really helpful thing to think about. I don't think you necessarily have to have an answer for every part of that question or know 100%, but it's good to have a general idea. Like, are you trying to get your kid ready for college? Do you have bigger goals than that? You know, what are you trying to achieve, and what are the steps you need to take to get you and your family there? Chapter 2 is choosing your homeschool approach. So it talks about different methodologies. So this is helpful, especially when you're looking at curriculum and they say that they're Charlotte Mason inspired or classical. You kind of know what you're getting into and what they're drawing from to do all of that. Chapter 3 is what to teach and when. This I think is my favorite chapter because this is something that I always think about every year. What subjects am I going to teach? So this talks about all the things to think about and when you should focus on each part. And I just found this chapter really, really helpful. Chapter 4 is choosing quality curriculums. This is all about vetting curriculum. Who wrote it? What are their credentials? Why did they write it? Is it rigorous? Was it tested? Is it going to be easy for a homeschool family to use? All those sorts of questions that you want to ask yourself when you're looking at a curriculum. If you know you have a hard time being consistent, it's probably going to be beneficial for you to choose the curriculum that's going to help you be consistent, whatever that looks like for you, because consistency is so important in making sure that you reach what your academic goals are. Chapter 5 is creating and implementing a teaching plan. So that's again talking about what you want to teach your kid. Chapter 6 is finding support. And then this whole second section is Reader's Digest version of how we learn. So this is really helpful too. And they cite all their sources, which I love. I'm not going to go through every section in here just because it will take us forever. They talk about learning differences at the back too, and some suggestions and tips for that. Knowing when to quit, which is important. And then they have back here some recommended further reading and just some other checklists and stuff. So I highly recommend this, especially if you're new to homeschooling. But even if you're not, I think it's a helpful, condensed summary of all the things you need to think about when you are setting up your new school year. So this next book, The Well-Trained Mind, is the foundational guide to neoclassical homeschooling. So a traditional classical curriculum has the classics like Latin and Greek as their backbone. This neoclassical curriculum really has history as its spine, and everything is supposed to feed off of history, which I think is a super cool idea, and I have not been able to implement it in my homeschool, but I'm really happy with the curriculum that we're using, so no complaints there. Classical education has this idea of stages of learning: the grammar stage, the logic stage, and the rhetoric stage. The grammar stage is the early years where your child is absorbing information and they can memorize like crazy. So you're trying to cram as much memorization of facts and things into their heads as possible so that they can build on that knowledge later. When memorization is a little bit harder, they already have all of that background knowledge in their head. I don't know that child development science backs up this strict kindergarten through 4th grade is the grammar stage, and then the next stage is the logic stage where they're ready for more analysis. I don't think it holds true for those really rigid categories, but I think in general to think about when your kids are younger, exposing them to a wide variety of knowledge, making sure they're building all that background information is really important, because when they get to older grades and they do have to start doing more analysis, they need to be able to know things, to draw comparisons. Like if you ask them to write an opinion piece about baseball, they have to know something about baseball in order to have an opinion on it, that kind of stuff. So the logic stage is more analysis, and then the rhetoric stage is kind of more formalized logic and analysis. It's kind of in a nutshell. She talks about it in here a lot. But what I really like about this book is that as she goes through each section, in preschool, basically, you don't have to do a lot, but she has a book list of things that you can look for. And then in each subsequent section, grammar stage, logic stage, rhetoric stage, she goes through each subject and talks about what you should be focusing on. She has these suggested schedules too. I recommend just completely ignoring them. I read on her blog, I think, that her publisher made her put them in, and they're just completely ridiculous. No one would have time to do all of the stuff in here if you followed those steps. One of the other things that I appreciate about Well-Trained Mind is she does give curriculum suggestions. A lot of them are not secular, so I don't really use her curriculum suggestions, but they are all rigorous and like vetted for that, if that's your primary concern. But one of the things that I really like about this is for each subject, she talks about, if you do want to do it on your own, how can you pull together an academically sound and rigorous curriculum that's going to teach your kid everything you need to know. She also talks about bringing writing into different subjects, like writing across the curriculum, which is a big thing in the writing revolution, which I think is really helpful for kids. So I read sections of this book every year when I'm thinking about how I want to tackle subjects, like what kind of curriculum do I want? What am I looking for? This is sort of like the expanded version of that choosing curriculum section from How to Homeschool the Kids You Have. So I don't necessarily use all the resources that she puts in here, but I think about like the things that she suggests you do, like introducing logic at this age, or making sure your child knows 10 history facts at this age or whatever. I think of those, I don't follow all of them as like hard and fast rules, but I do think of them as sort of helpful benchmarks of, can the curriculum that I'm using meet this goal? Are we on the right track to do the things that I want to do? So that's where this book is helpful for me, and just sort of giving me something to contrast to our homeschooling, to think about if I'm okay with where we're at, if there's something that I need to change, or do we deviate from what she's saying? And if so, is that a deviation that I'm happy with, or do I want to tweak something? So this is really helpful for me for that. I will say that this book is really long, and I think for a lot of new homeschoolers, it's very overwhelming. So if you do jump into it, just take the advice you need and then ignore the rest until you've kind of got a handle on what you're doing. So once I've used these books to kind of figure out what I'm going to teach each year, and now that my daughter's a little bit older, it's not going to change as much from year to year, but in kindergarten we did just a few subjects. And then in first grade, I read these a lot thinking, what do I want to add? And then moving into second grade, is there anything additional that I want to add? When in the future am I going to add additional subjects? Like when do I want to introduce philosophy? That kind of thing, kind of mapping out long term. I do have a spreadsheet where I've mapped out kind of what subjects I want to do each year from kindergarten all the way through the end of high school, because why not? And I don't need to stick to that completely, but it gives me a goal to look at when I'm looking at curriculum. How far will this curriculum take me through what I want to do? Like, for example, History Quest, I was nervous about starting it because when we started it, they only had 2 volumes out. And so now I'm in the situation of, we have the 3rd volume, History Quest, but that's not exactly the history cycle that I wanted to do. What are we going to do now? Which I don't like changing curriculum like that. I would prefer to use something that has a whole 4-year cycle, for example, or it has like Singapore goes all the way through the end of elementary math. And so then I'm going to have to change something else, which again, I don't like, but I like Singapore so much that I'm willing to, at that point, have to change to a different curriculum. So it's kind of like trade-offs. Do I want a curriculum that's going to go all the way through, or am I really excited about a curriculum that I'm going to have to switch up? Anyway, this is all just stuff that I think about every year when I'm planning what subjects I'm going to do and when I'm thinking about what curriculum I want to use and all of that. So that's my first step in planning for the new year. So I hope you found this helpful. I will link everything in the description box below. I am an Amazon affiliate, so if you click on a link and make a purchase, I do receive a small commission. Thank you for watching.